My name's Tim Cross and I'm a senior reporter at Video Week. And this is our panel session on do agencies and publishers agree on what the future of identity looks like? I think what we've seen over the past year or so as identity has come to the fore is there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of racing to find solutions for the post-cookie world or the post-IDFA world. And part of that has ended up with sort of lots of industry level solutions emerging, but also lots of individual publishers and agencies figuring out how they want to deal with the post cookie world and what identity looks like for them in that future. And what we're kind of asking here is, to what extent are all these different approaches aligned? Is everything going to work together once cookies stop being supported in under a year's time? Or is everyone be going off in their own world directions, and we're going to find out in less than a year's time that none of these things are actually compatible? So that's what we're here to answer. So to start, I'll just let each of my panelists introduce themselves, starting with you, Harvin.
Hey, I'm Harvin. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering at Xandr. My role basically works across both the buy and sell side and kind of everything in the middle as well. I'm really excited to be here.
Wonderful. Dora?
Hi everyone, I'm Dora Michail-Clendinnen, the Chief Strategy Officer at the Ozone Project.
Thanks, and Sherif.
I'm Sherif Guindy. I'm the SVP of Data Strategy in EMEA. I look after everything from data governance to audience strategy to platform strategy for all our clients.
Wonderful, thank you. So to start off, we will just take a bit of a broad look at how buyers and sellers are thinking about identity. So we'll start off looking at the buy side. Sherif, on a broad level, what do you think buyers are looking for out of identity solutions for the post-cookie world? And what sorts of solutions do you think buyers are showing most interest in?
I think buyers and advertisers are looking for assurance, right? Assurance that the platforms will give the right data privacy and follow the regulations. And equally important, they're looking for simplicity. I think most advertisers and most buyers are, concerned about the noise and the fragmentation happening, and they'll be looking to the market for just simplicity to ease their operations.
But in terms
and more
of
importantly, obviously, they're looking for effectiveness of their media campaigns. Right? That's what they want to do.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of like the specific types of solutions they're looking at, I mean, I guess we could perhaps categorize, we've got the more sort of token-based solutions where it's trying to recreate that, cookie-like capability to track people across different websites, or there's more like these solutions created by specific publishers where it's more about buyers bringing in their own data, matching that to publishers' data within that sort of world. Which of those do you think is sort of more interesting to buyers right now?
I can definitely say from what we're seeing is that, what's catching on most is the walled garden solutions, because they're providing scale and like the, less concern. However, there is a lot of uptake and interest in the bigger ID solutions out there and how they can combine with privacy sandboxes. So, solutions like unified IDs, net IDs are of a lot of interest, and advertisers are really looking closely at them, advertisers and agencies, of course. But I think they're also looking to how that is going to be combined with privacy sandbox environments. If we can combine both in a way that allows people to share data and kind of have mathematical representation of it, that would be the ultimate solution, I think, for most buyers.
Yeah. Harvin, obviously, Xandr gets quite a good overview of both buy side and the sell side. The buy side companies you're talking with and you work with, which sorts of solutions are they showing interest in?
So yeah, I think it's quite a complicated question because there's so many different things happening. So there's definitely interest in industry IDs. So when I talk about industry IDs, I mean things like LiveRamp or NetID or UID. There's also a lot of interest, and I think a lot of work being done to better understand what a publisher's first-party data offering looks like. We've got the idea of agencies starting to build their own marketplaces, which allows them to get much closer to the much closer to the publisher and have that conversation and deeply understand what it is that the publisher is able to offer. Another angle at this is thinking about ways of doing business that don't necessarily need an identifier. So I'm talking about things like new approaches to contextual targeting as well. Definitely seeing a lot of uptick in testing different types of contextual solutions or other types of identity. So, things like what information is available on the bid request that isn't necessarily tied to an identifier. There might be information you can glean from the IP address, from even things like the weather that's currently, or like what Twitter sentiments look like at the moment, or anything like that. So there's loads of other places that you can get data that a buyers are starting to investigate. So there's not one clear answer, I don't think.
Yeah, interesting. So looking then more at the publisher side specifically, Dora, obviously Ozone, sort of an alliance of multiple publishers. So I'm sure you'll have a good overview on where publishers' heads are at right now. What do you think publishers' priorities are for the post-cookie world, and what sorts of solutions are they most interested in developing and being part of?
There's a few different scenarios, I think, in terms of how all of this plays out, notwithstanding, of course, what the recent Google blog post, I suppose, announced or reaffirmed, because it wasn't necessarily new news. The publishers have got, publishers are looking at their options, right? There's certainly publishers who are pretty advanced in terms of their first party solutions. So they may have partnered with certain providers like an InfoSum, for example, to create a clean room through which they can use their data, their first party data and match that within advertisers. That's certainly of interest to publishers to continue to explore. I think advertisers find that an interesting proposition. The challenge, as you might imagine, is scale, which is why a play like Ozone's, I think, is quite interesting for publishers, because with a broad publisher alliance at the same scale potentially as some of the existing walled gardens, it becomes a new and alternative proposition for advertisers to think about, that doesn't limit the options in the marketplace. And I think that's certainly the provision for which Ozone will base our future planning when it comes to ID. In fact, we've already started. Verified ID is for us a key priority this year, building that out with publishers, because the alternative, I think, is pretty limiting for publishers. They don't have many other options.
Yeah.
And I think we've, as a collective of publishers, there's question marks about how best to use assets, and ensuring that true value is attributed to the publisher, because lots of value ends up shifting away from publishers and into the technology. And we want to sort of reverse that trend in many ways.
Yeah, so that's like a quite a broad overview of like priorities on both sides. So I guess one question stemming from that is, to what extent, from what you've all seen so far, is there actually dialogue going on between the buyer and the sell side at the moment? I know there's like various industry forums for dialogue over this stuff. There's things like IAB's Project REARC just this week have put out their sort of initial standards, and there's been conversations at W3C more around privacy sandbox stuff. But just from what you've all seen, are both sides actually talking to each other about the various solutions they're investing in?
From what I've seen, yes, they are, but it's hard because there's so much fragmentation. There's so many different approaches, and in some respects, I think that's the role ad tech kind of plays. We can kind of take measures to try and stop some of that fragmentation and sort of build interoperability. So I think that's quite important. So yeah, I think those conversations are happening. I think they're going to speed up, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that to come, as it feels like we're kind of edging closer and closer. And I think the Google announcement this week's definitely added a lot more fuel to that fire as well.
We'll get onto the Google announcement in a second, but Dora and Sherif, are you seeing dialogue between the two sides?
Definitely, and more than dialogue, I'm seeing testing is going on, and that's really positive. I think it's fair to say it's still pretty early, right? It's we're actively engaging in conversations between the buy and sell side, but that doesn't mean everything is decided, and I think that's probably a good thing, because things are so fast paced, and there's opportunity, I think, but certainly I've seen advertisers and publishers having direct conversations about what the future of ID looks like and what the interplay between both parties looks like.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think from my side, I think most of the conversations so far have been, publishers to ad tech. I think most of the conversations are on that side. I think buyers are starting to get involved now, agencies and brands. There's, like I said, there's a lot of consensus that, they're open to the same direction, but I think there's still early days for buyers to really play an active role. What's really interesting, which has already been mentioned, is around contextual targeting, right? So where the buyers come into play and they're having very interesting conversation is around contextual targeting solutions. However, on the ID front, I think we're still early in those days.
Yeah, interesting. So I kind of want to start looking at specifically at sort of these alternative identifier type solutions and sort of token-based solutions. And the big question there at the moment is obviously following Google's announcement last week. A lot of people have said those sorts of solutions are essentially dead in the water. Others have said that's not really the case. We're not sort of beholden as an industry to Google sort of setting the tempo. So I'd be interested to know what you all think of that. Have Google essentially set some of the terms of what the post-cookie world looks like, and are those alternative identifiers dead in the water, or do you think it's not quite that simple?
I don't think they're dead in the water at all. I think there's a really big position for those. So, Google have said that they're not going to have their technology on the buy side buy from any of those identifiers. They're not going to have that level of granularity, and that's absolutely fine. I think that represents an opportunity for like the non-walled gardens, for the open internet to really innovate in that space and kind of push that conversation forward. I don't think we need Google there, and the fact that they're kind of moving out of that space I think that's good, and it represents an opportunity for the open internet.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look at Google's revenue, obviously most of it comes from their own platforms, right? So if you take it from their standpoint, it makes sense. I think this opens a big opportunity for alliances on the publisher side, and this is where the Ozone Alliance and project becomes very, very exciting and very interesting, right? Because it gives an alternative solution and obviously high quality content as well. So I don't think they're dead in the water. I just think people will take some time to navigate the complexity of the situation.
Yeah, and there are certain elements that I think from an Ozone perspective, we're focused on the similar ideas, I suppose, to some of what Google explained in their own thinking, in their own blog post, around the idea of cohorts or segments, or whatever we call them, but the principles are very similar. Ways in which we can create identifiers that signal to advertisers important aspects of an audience. It can absolutely be done in a privacy first way. It can be done at scale, and it doesn't have to be only done via Google. There are plenty of other ways that it can be done, and it does create absolutely an opportunity for lots of conversations to develop. And I think for publishers, it's a question of deciding how they approach their strategy. There are plenty of ways in which they can work, like Sherif said, about in terms of alliances, and create value where maybe as a solo publisher that's harder. Together it becomes very possible and very real.
It's also worth bearing in mind that announcement came from the Google Ads team and not from Google Chrome. And these are two completely separate teams within Google. So it wasn't really a technical announcement about what the browser's going to support. And if it was, then yeah, potentially that would be a different story for these identity solutions. But it wasn't. It was simply Google Ads team saying that the Google Ads stack isn't going to support those identifiers, which I think is a very different thing to bear in mind.
Yeah. Maybe just one quick one for you, Harvin, looking specifically at those sort of alternative identifiers. To what extent is it important? Because I guess one of the early conversations around those was, you know, a lot of what I was hearing was people saying, well, we don't know which one we're backing yet because we're kind of waiting for everyone else to decide which one they're backing. To what extent is it actually important that everyone, you know, agrees on one or two identifiers, do you think?
I think that's going to be really hard because there's different identifiers that are more important in different regions. So if you look at something like LiveRamp, it's really strong in the States. I know they're building out a sort of European presence as well, but it's not as strong. Something like NetID is really strong in Central Europe, but it doesn't really have a presence outside of Central Europe. I know there's interoperability, or there's coming interoperability between LiveRamp and UID2, so I think that's quite interesting. The way we're thinking about it is it's going to be really challenging, so we need to think about that interoperability at the platform level and how we can solve for that. I think the other thing is it kind of depends on what kind of publisher you are and how big you are, how many of your users are logged in, all that sort of thing. Some of the publishers we're working with, they're less excited about the industry IDs and much more excited about their own identifier, because they sort of think to themselves, well, hang on, we're big enough that we don't necessarily want to be part of an industry ID solution. We want to build our own ecosystem. So it kind of really depends on where you are and what kind of a publisher you are as well.
Yeah. I want to start looking at those more publisher-led solutions now. So, I mean, I guess, you know, one of the things we're seeing at the moment is a lot of publishers building out their own first-party data sets, trying to get more of their audiences logged in and then saying to buyers, you know, you can come in and we've got lots of nice data on all our users and we know who they are. And you can also bring in your data and match it to ours, and then that's going to be great. So I just want to look a bit at those. First off, maybe one for you, Sherif. To what extent, like, what sorts of data are you wanting as a buyer out of those publisher-led offerings? What about those is interesting to you?
So in terms of the data, obviously you're looking at you know, the ability to kind of segment audiences by interests and be able to kind of tie the audiences to the content, right? That is significantly what the whole process is about. How that data is made available is not that important, in my opinion, at this stage, right? Because if you can still trade on it and if you can still buy it, it's fine. I think the challenge becomes when you have to go through that process differently per publisher. This is when big brands will have to make bets and decisions. And I think this might be the most dangerous thing for the industry. If they're not giving the ability to have an economically viable solution where they don't have to invest a lot of money and time, then that will be fine. I don't think they care that much. The other thing I'll say is from the publisher side, I think it's a matter of how costly will it be for them if they create their own solutions, right? Like if each publisher creates its own solution, eventually it will be too costly for them to maintain. And this is where consolidation needs to happen to make that available.
I don't disagree. I think that the challenge for publishers is choosing exactly where the most value, where they can find the most value from their assets. You know, for many years, publishers have been at the passive end of the supply chain, right? Receiving ad revenue for what they provide into the ecosystem. And I see a future where publishers can actually be much more active in that and make decisions where they forge their own path rather than be at the behest of the roadmap of, you know, ID solutions that are owned industry-wide or that don't necessarily have the publisher best value at its heart, you know, at its core. And this is what we are trying to solve with Ozone. It's a platform that is if you like, it's for advertisers but built by publishers. And agree with this idea of, the danger of fragmentation is that actually we end up with a bunch of mini walled gardens, and that's just really hard if you're a buyer. It's hard based on what Harvin has said. It makes it harder for the interoperability in terms of how the connections begin to work. I think that the opportunities for publishers, large or small, is to collaborate and forge a solution together. I think it's pretty plain that's really the best alternative, or the best option, I should say, for publishers.
I think now is a really exciting time to be a publisher, because exactly like you said, in the past, things, with the third-party cookie and the application of third-party data, it's kind of meant the publisher, even though they're the ones producing all the content, they haven't been the most, sort of important part of that value chain. Whereas now the publisher's front and center, because the publisher, they're the one that's closest to the customer, so they're the one that's able to get consent. And they're the one that's able to have a persistent identifier, if that's the path they're going down, however that looks, which I think puts a lot of value and makes the publisher like a really important part of the kind of ecosystem now. So it's kind of handing power back to the publishers. But I think it's really important that publishers now think about, exactly like you said, how can they extract the maximum value from that asset that they now have, which is that identifier and that identity resolution.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just an email address, right? It's incredibly value if it's a logged in user, and you can tie that to an email address or a mobile phone number, for example. But it doesn't have to be, publisher first party data being stitched together, using a bunch of assets, IP address, location, etc. Stitching all of that together is still incredibly valuable, and there, like you said, there's such an opportunity for publishers if they make decisions based on what a new future could look like, that puts them very much front and center with advertisers, forging that solution together based on the two sets of assets that can be matched and can be used together in a privacy first compliant way.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I really wanted to touch on, is the extent to which sort of the data we've got on both sides really work inside these kinds of products. Because I guess the two things I hear are, number one, obviously some brands have lovely big data sets they built up probably through, being digital natives, but others don't. And then the other problem is that, actual like match rates aren't necessarily always fantastic within these products. So what sort of work do you all think needs to be done to sort of tackle those problems?
I think there's a similar challenge on both sides. So both publishers and brands need to spend and invest a lot of money in gathering their own first-party data and make it available for themselves. I think brands will be looking at publishers who have, like Dora said, have organized their data in a way and made sense of it without the need to augment it with other third-party data sets, because that's when it gets a bit unclear and buyers will not take a lot of risks in that sense. I think for advertisers, I think, they need to, and that's where I said about big bets, like they need to understand what are the 2-3 types of IDs that are getting traction in the market. And that's how they're going to collect their data to make sure that it fits those match rates. So far match rates have been the highest with email addresses, right? Quite frankly, nothing else has had the same amount of scale. So, personally, I think if that's the way to go, then that's fine. But I think, if there's any other sort of matching of IDs that is going to get that scale, we still haven't seen a significant improvement on it, from our side at least.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? Because users aren't logging into all websites. You don't want to log into every website you visit. And also, let's say you sell toilet roll or you sell chocolate bars. Well, why would you have your users' email addresses? So I think work needs to be done there. And I think maybe that's where an agency can really help a brand as well to, is there some sort of content marketing that can be done to build that first party relationship and get those email addresses? And does that make sense? And same on the publisher side, I'm definitely seeing, when I visit newspapers, they're kind of putting up a login wall and asking me to log in, and it's obvious why that's happening. But it is definitely a challenge with email addresses. But there's a lot of value there as well when it works. If you're using something like an InfoSum as well, you can do some really exciting types of campaigns there.
and the compounded problem there is that as a consumer, is that what we want? Do we want to have to give our email addresses to every, to every website that we ever visit? It's a real consideration for the consumers, and the irony is that we're all trying to be better with regard to privacy, but because it's better for the consumer, but doesn't mean we're not going to annoy them some other way.
Yeah.
We all are already having to accept cookies on every website that we ever log into, that we ever visit. We're trying to do the right thing. I think we've still got a long way to go until it's a perfect solution, right?
Yeah.
And sorry to catch you on that. I think we're definitely all right. I think we don't want to collect people's emails, and that's not the way. I mean, I was talking about the matching of data between platforms, but yes, there's obviously a lot of other ways to create relevance for customers, right? Like there's context targeting, there's better Flock and similar products where we can kind of create cohorts. Things like that might be the right way to go, rather than collecting emails from every single customer out there, which is A, not realistic, and B, like you said, Dora, it's not always the most privacy centric way to do things.
We are just about out of time, but listening to that conversation, it sounds like there is still, well, as you just said, Dora, there's still lots of work to do. But just before we go, I'd love to hear from each of you how confident you are that these differences between the two sides will be reconciled in time, because while there's a decent amount of time left, it is less than a year now till cookies stop being supported on Chrome. So how confident are we feeling? Harvin, we'll start with you.
So I've been in ad tech for about 10 years now. And in that time, it's an industry that's constantly reinventing itself. And each time we have to reinvent ourselves, we come back stronger. And I see this as like just the next wave, the next iteration of what ad tech looks like. It doesn't make sense that ad tech's creepy, right? And we need to solve that problem. We need to have a privacy first, customer centric approach to this. And I think if we can get there, and I'm pretty sure we will, right? We're a smart industry. We're good at innovating quickly. If we get there, that's going to be the next wave of what ad tech looks like.
Dora?
I'm slightly bolder in my ambition for the industry, maybe than that, which is, I agree, it's an evolution. Yes, it's the next iteration, but actually it's pretty seismic what's coming down the road. It's a bit sort of once in a generation type opportunity to really change the way the industry does what it does, and the way that publishers and advertisers work together, with all the resulting technology that is required to make it work, the interoperability of that. There's a real opportunity, I think, that this represents for publishers and advertisers to work together to build something that is actually revolutionary, not just evolutionary.
Sherif, how about you?
I am equally optimistic. I have a lot of faith, not just in the industry, but in the market, right? When there is demand, there is always innovation and supply and a solution. And there's definitely a lot of demand to get into a better place for a cleaner internet and a more effective advertising ecosystem. And you know what? The market will follow. So I am very confident.
Wonderful. Well, you guys are all optimistic, so I'll be optimistic too. That's all the time we've got, but that was a brilliant conversation. So thank you to all of my panelists, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.